In the dim glow of a single desk lamp, the archivist ran his trembling fingers across the dust-coated files laid out before him. The folders were swollen with age, edges chewed by time, marked with stamps that had long since been retired, restricted, unknown, category black. The basement air tasted of mold and secrecy, thick enough to feel on the tongue. He hesitated before opening the first folder, as if disturbing the papers might stir something else awake, something older than any government department that had ever tried to contain it. He had spent most of his life buried under testimonies, radio logs, missing persons reports, and brittle photographs that captured more darkness than truth. Yet tonight felt different. Tonight, the documents seemed to pulse with a kind of quiet desperation, like they wanted to be read. Wanted to be freed. The archivist wiped the fog from his cracked glasses and exhaled, steadying the tremor in his hands. There was a weight building in his chest, familiar but sharper, a warning he had ignored too many times before. Outside the basement door, the world slept. No traffic, no footsteps, not even the hum of distant machinery. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel natural, the kind that pressed inward like a tightening fist. The archivist tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but then he remembered. Every story he was about to reveal had been sealed for precisely this reason. Not because they were unbelievable, but because they were too real. Too raw, too dangerous. He flipped through the first report, scanning lines written hurriedly in a dying typewriter's uneven rhythm. The words bled urgency. A missing trucker. A cabin discovered where no cabin had ever been. A signal transmitted from a shutdown station. Details he'd once dismissed as hallucinations or hoaxes suddenly threaded together in his mind like veins converging toward a single, beating heart. He felt his breath falter. They weren't isolated events. They were symptoms. The archivist leaned back in his chair, bones cracking like old floorboards. A dull ache pulsed behind his eyes, and for a moment he thought he saw something move in the dark corner of the room, something just beyond definition. When he blinked, it was gone. But the sensation lingered, creeping over his skin like cold fingertips. He rubbed his arms, failing to warm himself, though the room was far from cold. He reached for his recorder, the same one he'd used for decades to document his descent into these forbidden archives. The red light flickered on, forming a tiny, fragile star in the basement gloom. "If anyone ever hears this," he whispered, voice cracking, "understand that these cases were never closed. They were buried alive." His throat tightened, as if invisible hands were gripping it, urging him to stop. But he continued. He had to. Silence was how everything began to rot. As he spoke, the basement seemed to grow smaller, the shadows thicker, as though the walls themselves were inching closer. Papers rustled without wind. The lamp buzzed, dimmed, then steadied, but not before plunging the archivist into a heartbeat of absolute darkness. In that instant, he felt something standing behind him, close enough to breathe against his neck. He didn't turn. He couldn't. Some truths were too heavy to face directly. When the light returned, he forced himself to continue recording. "These 5 incidents," he murmured, "are the last traces of places the world has already forgotten. Places where maps fail, where logic dissolves, where something ancient stirs beneath the surface." His voice faltered to a whisper. "I don't know how much time I have before they silence me too. But someone must know what waits in the middle of nowhere." Then, slowly, painfully, he opened the first file, unaware that the breathing behind him had not stopped. The file trembled in the archivist's hands as he unfolded the brittle pages. The first case was stamped in fading ink. Case 01, Route 191 Incident. A chill seeped through the basement as he began reading the testimony of the lone survivor, truck driver Evan Holt. The report opened with a frantic scrawl, handwriting that clawed across the page as though written in the dark. The archivist felt something in his gut twist. The words radiated terror so pure, it felt fresh, as if Evan had written them moments ago rather than decades in the past. Evan's journey began like any other delivery run. A midnight haul across the desert, headlights cutting through endless dunes and skeletal rock. But somewhere past the last fuel stop, the desert changed. The wind died, the crickets fell silent, and even the hum of the engine felt muffled, drowned beneath a heavy, unseen pressure. The road stretched impossibly straight, too still, too perfect. Evan wrote that he felt like he was driving across the spine of something asleep. Around 1:47 a.m., Evan claimed the ground beneath his tires began to pulse. Not vibrate, pulse. Slow, rhythmic, like breath. The steering wheel tugged in his grip, the truck veering against his control. He slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop on the lonely asphalt. That was when he heard it, a deep exhale rising from beneath the road. The archivist paused at that line, swallowing hard. Beneath the road, he imagined all the sealed reports, all the disappearances, and suddenly none of it felt isolated anymore. Evan stepped out of the truck to inspect the pavement, but the desert night greeted him with a suffocating silence. His flashlight flickered as he swept it across the road, and the beam trembled over something impossible. The asphalt subtly lifted, rising and sinking, expanding and contracting as though it were flesh. Evan pressed a shaking hand against it, and it felt warm. Too warm. A living heat radiated through the surface. Then came the sound. A groaning stretch of something vast uncoiling beneath his feet. The report described the road splitting open, not with the sudden violence of an earthquake but with the slow, deliberate motion of lips parting. A fissure yawned across the highway, revealing layers beneath the asphalt, fibers, not rocks. Tendons. Something pale and wet flexed inside the widening gap. Evan stumbled backwards, tripping over his own boots as the smell of iron filled the air. He wrote that the desert felt like it was watching him breathe. His dashcam caught everything, until the footage abruptly cut to static. The report noted that the recording had been confiscated by federal agents within 24 hours. They filed Evan's testimony as a stress-induced hallucination, though the archivist saw the annotations in the margins, handwritten notes from investigators who had visited Route 191 afterward. They too heard the breathing, but their accounts were redacted with black ink thick enough to blot out entire paragraphs. The final page contained Evan's last statement before he vanished weeks later. His handwriting was jagged, almost frantic. The road isn't a road. It's a mouth. It wakes when it's hungry. The archivist lowered the page, heart hammering hard against his ribs. For a moment he thought he felt the floor vibrate beneath his chair, subtle, like a slow heartbeat echoing in the concrete. He held still, breath thinning, waiting to be sure. But the tremor faded, or hid. He closed the file with trembling hands, but the basement felt colder now, tighter, the shadows clinging to the walls like damp skin. This was only the first case, and already the archivist sensed that something was horribly wrong. These weren't stories. They were warnings. And whatever lay beneath Route 191, whatever breathed in the dark, was not content to stay buried. The archivist opened the next folder with hesitant fingers, the edges of the pages crackling like dry bones. Case 02, Yukon Forest Incident. A chill crept through the basement before he even read the first line, as though the forest itself exhaled from the paper. He steadied himself, recalling Evan Holt's final words about the breathing road. Now, another place, another wound on the earth, waited to speak. The events had occurred nearly a decade after Route 191, yet the fear in the report felt just as raw, just as alive. The victims were two hikers, Laura Whitmore and Mitchell Crane, experienced outdoorsmen who vanished during a weekend trek deep within the Yukon wilderness. Their last known communication was a blurry photo sent to a friend, a small wooden cabin standing where, according to all maps, no cabin had ever existed. The image had no timestamp, no metadata, as if the cabin didn't want to be remembered. The archivist shivered as he studied the photocopy clipped to the report, a crooked door, shuttered windows, and a dark smear in one corner that investigators insisted was a shadow. But shadows didn't lean forward. According to Mitchell's recovered audio recorder, the trouble began their first night. At 2:13 a.m., a sharp scream tore through the forest, high, layered, not echoed but stacked, as though multiple voices were screaming at once. The cabin walls trembled. The fire went out instantly, smothered by an invisible force. Laura can be heard whispering, "It's coming from inside," followed by a scratching sound, claws dragging along wood. But the cabin was empty. No footprints in or out. No animals nearby, and yet the screaming grew louder, pulsing from the walls as if something trapped beneath the floorboards was begging to be released. The report described the cabin as structurally impossible. The interior layout did not match the exterior. Rooms shifted, distances stretched and shrank. When the search team entered days later, measurements contradicted themselves. Hallways longer on the inside, windows misaligned, a second door behind the stove that led only to a blank wall. The archivist paused, uneasy. The description reminded him of the breathing road, geometry that bent, places that acted alive. When environments behaved like organisms, there was always something growing inside them. On Mitchell's recorder, the scratching intensified until it became frantic. Then suddenly, silence. Minutes pass. A soft thud. A single breath, not human. Then Laura's voice. "Don't look at the window." Rustling. Footsteps. Mitchell's panicked whisper. "It's copying us." The archivist's skin crawled. He replayed the recording in his mind from memory. One investigator noted that the final 30 seconds contained an extra set of footsteps, though neither Laura nor Mitchell mentioned a third person. The audio analysis team determined the unknown footsteps were out of sync with natural gait patterns, as if they belonged to something imitating a walk it had never learned properly. When rescuers finally located the cabin, they found only Mitchell, curled in a corner, eyes open, pupils dilated as if staring at something towering above him. He was alive but unresponsive, whispering a single phrase on repeat, "The shadows don't wait for night." Laura was never found, but deep gouges were carved into the inside of the cabin door, matching the length of human fingers, but spaced much wider, stretching far beyond normal reach. Investigators labeled it an animal attack, though no wildlife prints were present. Everything inside the cabin was intact except for the bed frame, twisted as if something enormous had been crawling beneath it. The archivist lowered the final page. His breathing felt shallow, as though the air in the basement had thickened. 2 cases now, 2 places where isolation didn't just expose danger, it created it. Places that changed shape, places that breathed, places that mimicked. As he slid the folder shut, a soft scratching echoed against the far wall behind him. Slow, deliberate, wood against wood. He stiffened. The basement had no windows, no animals, no wind, yet the sound continued. 3 long drags, then silence. The archivist closed his eyes, swallowing the rising dread. When he looked again, the shadows in the corner seemed different, longer, stretched, as though they had shifted while he wasn't watching. He steadied himself and reached for the next file, but his hand trembled uncontrollably. Something in these stories was beginning to bleed into the room, into reality. He could feel it. Whatever lurked in the Yukon cabin had followed Mitchell's voice onto the tape. And now, through the words on the page, it was following him. The archivist forced his eyes away from the shifting shadows and opened the third folder, its cover warped and water-stained as though it had been retrieved from a place that wanted to swallow it. Case 03, The Village with No Footprints. Even before he began reading, he felt a pressure in his skull, a deep thrumming pulse not unlike the breathing road or the trembling walls of the Yukon cabin. He steadied himself, swallowing the metallic taste of fear. This case, unlike the others, documented not one disappearance, but an entire community erased in a single night. The report began with the account of a government field team dispatched to investigate the sudden silence of Harrow's Peak, a remote mountain village of 42 residents. When the team arrived, they expected devastation, fires, storms, a landslide. Instead, they found the village perfectly intact, untouched, preserved with unsettling precision. Bowls of soup sat steaming on tables, still warm to the touch. Lamps flickered as if someone had just walked by. Laundry hung on wires, the droplets of water still clinging to cloth. But there were no people, no animals, no signs of movement, and worst of all, no footprints. The archivist read the description twice, his breath hitching. Snow coated the ground in a pure white sheet, not a single indentation marking where humans had walked, though the residents must have moved that day, cooked food, tended fires, washed clothes. It was as if the village had been populated by ghosts. One investigator noted the sterile silence, a phrase that made the archivist shift uncomfortably. He knew that silence, had felt it in the basement as the scratching behind him grew quiet. Silence that wasn't emptiness, but anticipation. The team discovered a message carved deep into the stone wall of the village well. We followed the singing. The letters were uneven, gouged with frantic force. The deeper lines were stained with something that was not quite rust. One investigator, Morales, reported hearing the same singing, shortly after, the soft hum of a melody that seemed to drift from the valley below. The archivist's pulse quickened, a humming. He had heard something like that earlier, faint and impossible, floating through the basement walls when the light had flickered. He pressed a hand to his temple, trying to dismiss the connection, but the sync felt too precise to ignore. According to the report, the humming grew louder at dusk. Morales described it not as a song, but as a pull, a gentle tug on the mind, coaxing, persuading. He followed it despite orders, stumbling down the narrow path toward the valley. He vanished from sight within minutes. The remaining team members tried to call him back, but their voices were swallowed by the same melody, now layered, harmonized, as if something in the valley was pleased to have drawn one of them in. The last radio transmission captured Morales whispering, "They're here. They've always been here." Then static. When the team descended the valley the next morning, they found no tracks, no signs of struggle, only Morales's radio, half sunken in fresh snow. And carved beneath it in the ice, long thin grooves, parallel and evenly spaced, as if something had been dragged backward into the darkness. The archivist shuddered so violently that the papers in his hand rattled. This was the third case involving places that created their own rules. No footprints where there should be many. Sounds that lured instead of echoed. Shadows that walked. Roads that breathed. Something was weaving these incidents together. He set the final page down, but as he did, the basement lights flickered again. A low hum vibrated through the room, soft, distant, exactly like the humming described in the report. His breath hitched. He turned slowly toward the far wall, where the shadows had lengthened unnaturally. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, something thin slipping behind a support beam. The humming grew faint, then stopped entirely, leaving behind a silence so sharp it felt like teeth closing. The archivist tried to steady his breathing as he closed the folder, but dread pooled in his stomach like cold tar. The singing from Harrow's Peak had crossed time, crossed distance, crossed paper, to reach him. The files weren't simply stories anymore, they were conduits. And whatever had taken the villagers had just found a way to hum inside his walls. The archivist's fingers hovered over the fourth folder for a long moment, as if some instinct begged him not to touch it. The cardboard felt colder than the others, unnaturally so, as though it had been stored not in a basement, but in permafrost. Case 04, the station that broadcasted after death. The title alone sent a tremor through the archivist's ribs. He knew this case by whispers, by rumors exchanged between investigators who later refused to speak on the record. Now the full report lay before him, and the basement felt smaller with every passing second. The incident centered on Signal Relay Station 47, an abandoned radio tower deep in the Nevada desert that had been decommissioned after a fire gutted the interior, killing the 3 operators on duty. For over 40 years, the site remained inert, silent, dead. Until one night, 2 decades after the fire, the station resumed broadcasting. The report described the transmission as a faint looped signal, a garbled voice repeating a phrase over and over. A phrase that made even the archivist stiffen as he read it aloud in a whisper: "We stayed too long." The first responding team recorded the broadcast from 70 miles away. When they arrived at the station, the tower lights were flickering, though the facility had no power supply. Inside, the air was unbearably hot, the scorched walls steaming as if freshly burned. Yet no fire had occurred. The archivist's throat tightened as he studied the attached infrared images. Blotches of heat clustered near the charred desks, in the exact spots where the operators had died. Except, the heat signatures were moving, pulsing, drifting across the room like restless shapes refusing to cool. According to the recovered tapes, the broadcast changed as the investigation team approached. The looping message warped, stretching into distorted echoes. Then a second voice joined, this one wet, dragging, as though its vocal cords were waterlogged. "Don't come inside," a phrase repeated 3 times, each slower than the last. The archivist felt a cold sweat drip down his back. Voices didn't gain new phrases on their own. Something was speaking through the burned equipment, or speaking from where the operators had been trapped. When the team entered the main control room, all the monitors flared to life at once, displaying footage from the night of the original fire. But the images were wrong, warped, delayed by fractions of a second. In the footage, the operators were still alive, scrambling, trying to escape flames clawing down the walls. But behind them, something else flickered into view, a shape forming in the reflection of the glass panels. A tall silhouette that never fully resolved, as if caught between frames. It reached for the operators, not physically, but like a reflection reaching through its own mirror. The report stated that one investigator, Harland, began screaming the moment the silhouette appeared on all screens simultaneously. He clawed at his eyes, shouting that something was watching him from the wrong side. His teammates subdued him, but the radios on their belts all activated at once, broadcasting a final message: "If you hear us, leave." Then every monitor shattered inward, as though pushed by invisible hands. When the team fled the building, the broadcast stopped instantly. The station has remained silent ever since. The archivist sat frozen, the folder slack in his grip. For a moment, he thought he heard faint static crackling in the basement, soft, like a dying signal trying to reach through concrete. His pulse hammered painfully, He slowly turned toward the radio on the top shelf, an old unit he kept for cataloging audio evidence. The device was off, unplugged, yet a thin whisper of static leaked from it, the same pitch described in the report, the same trembling frequency. He swallowed hard, feeling the air tighten around him. Each case he opened seeped further into the room, breathing roads, shifting cabins, humming valleys, and now signals from places that had burned long ago. He closed the folder with shaking hands, but the static lingered, crackling softly like a warning. Or like a voice trying to speak through him. The archivist reached for the fifth folder, though his hand trembled so violently that the papers nearly slid from the table. This one was darker than the rest, not by age or soot, but by some strange discoloration, like the cover had absorbed shadows rather than dust. Case 05, the well at Blackthorn Ridge. A location so remote it didn't appear on any official maps. He opened the file, and for the first time since entering the basement, he felt the sensation of being watched from above, as though something hung just beyond the reach of the light, listening. The incident involved a lone geologist, Mara Alden, who had been assigned to survey the rocky outcrops of Blackthorn Ridge after unusual seismic readings, long pulses, almost rhythmic, similar to a heartbeat. The archivist's stomach twisted at the familiar pattern. He had seen the same waveform in the Route 191 case. According to Mara's journal, she discovered a perfectly circular well hidden among the stones, its stones impossibly smooth, as though worn down not by water or time, but by touch. The air above it was cold enough to frost her skin despite the summer heat. She wrote that she heard whispers rising from the darkness, though her instruments recorded no sound. On the second night, Mara set up camp beside the ridge. At 3:11 a.m., her recorder captured a deep groan echoing from the earth, long, trembling, as though something massive was dragging chains across stone far beneath the surface. The archivist paused, his breath tight. He could hear the same groan now, faint, vibrating along the basement's concrete floor. He pressed a trembling hand down, feeling the subtle thrum under his palm. The cases were no longer stories, they were merging, bleeding across distance and time. Mara's final recordings described seeing movement inside the well, a figure, pale and elongated, climbing upward without touching the walls. Not climbing, floating. Its body swayed like a drowned corpse suspended underwater. Its face remained hidden in shadow, but she saw its hand reach the edge, long, skeletal fingers dripping a dark, tar-like substance that evaporated into cold mist. She fled into the night, but the recorder picked up a second sound, her name, whispered in a voice that matched her own. The archivist swallowed hard. Something imitated her in the Yukon case too. Something that copied what it wanted. The rescue team found Mara's tent ripped open from the inside. No footprints, no signs of struggle, only her gear neatly arranged beside the well, recorder, compass, satchel, placed too precisely, as though someone unfamiliar with human habits had tried to display them. The well itself was warm to the touch when investigators arrived, pulsing faintly like a beating heart. One investigator tied a line around himself and descended only 20 feet before screaming for extraction. He emerged wild-eyed and incoherent, repeating a single phrase, "It has her face. It has her face." He never spoke another word. Geological scans of the ridge revealed something impossible. The well extended not vertically, but horizontally, stretching miles beneath the ground, like a tunnel carved by something enormous burrowing through the earth. Something that moved, something that fed. The report abruptly ended with a redacted section the length of a full page, black ink layered so thick it warped the paper. But faint impressions beneath the censorship remained. The archivist traced them with his fingertips, connected to Case 01, Case 02, Case 03, his breath hitched. They had known. They had all known. He lowered the file, heart thundering as the basement lights flickered again. The static from the old radio blended with a low hum rising through the floor. The shadows on the far wall stretched upward, long and thin, as though something beneath the concrete was beginning to stand. The archivist felt the air tighten, cold and electric. He realized, with dawning horror, that these cases were not isolated horrors scattered across remote locations. They were limbs, pieces, of something vast, something waking. And now, after reading all 5, he understood the truth too late. It had needed him to open them, to speak them, to remember them. The humming deepened, vibrating up his spine. In the corner of the room, something pale began to rise from the floor, as though climbing from a well that wasn't there. Understood. Here is the continuation, fully in English, 8 paragraphs, dramatic, and directly connected to the previous chapter's tone and events, without responding to your instruction. The silence that followed felt heavier than the darkness itself. After the apparition dissolved into the cold air, the room seemed to breathe on its own, expanding and contracting as if something unseen was moving inside the walls. Mira clutched the lantern tighter, her pulse trembling in her throat. The others stood frozen, unsure whether to whisper or run, terrified that any sound might trigger whatever was still lurking nearby. A sudden gust swept through the hallway, extinguishing half the lantern's flame and leaving a trembling shard of light. The corridor ahead rippled, faintly at first, then violently, like reality was bending under an unseen pressure. The floorboards groaned beneath them, not from weight, but from something crawling underneath the planks, pacing, circling, waiting. Aaron stepped forward despite the tremor in his hands. He knew they had no choice but to press on. If we stay still, he whispered, it'll find us faster. His voice cracked, but the others followed, moving as a single shadow down the corridor. Every step sounded wrong. Too loud, too hollow, echoing in a way that didn't match the size of the building. It felt as if the house had grown deeper, hungrier. Then came the whisper. A thin, brittle voice slipped between the walls like a cold blade. It didn't speak a language any of them knew, but its intent was unmistakable, an invitation mixed with a threat, curling into their ears and tugging at their resolve. Mira felt the sound slide beneath her skin, freezing her blood as the temperature plummeted around them. Ahead, a doorway slammed open by itself, revealing a room they swore wasn't there before. Inside, moonlight pooled like spilled mercury, illuminating claw marks across the floor, fresh ones, trailing into the far corner where the shadows thickened unnaturally. Something hid there, breathing with a slow, deliberate rhythm that made their lungs lock in fear. Liam raised his flashlight toward the corner and instantly regretted it. The beam didn't illuminate the darkness, it sank into it, swallowed whole as if the shadows were alive and feeding. The breathing stopped. For a single, unbearable moment, the room held its breath with them, charged with the promise of something catastrophic. Then the darkness moved. It didn't leap or crawl, it expanded, blooming outward like a living storm of ink. The temperature crashed, the walls cracked, and the floor split open in jagged veins as the entity surged toward them. Mira screamed for them to run, but the sound barely escaped her throat before the force of the presence shoved them backward. They fled down the corridor, chased not by footsteps, but by the pressure of a colossal, unseen force that bent the air and made the lights explode one by one behind them. The house seemed to pulse with malicious life, guiding the entity closer with every twist and corner. And deep within the chaos, Mira realized something horrifying. The entity wasn't trying to kill them. It was trying to herd them, pushing them towards something far worse waiting ahead. If you want, We can proceed to the next chapter, tighten the lore, or shift the tone darker. The corridor funneled them into a narrow staircase that spiraled downward, as if the house itself wanted to swallow them whole. The walls tightened the deeper they went, coated in a wet, tar-like sheen that clung to their sleeves when they brushed against it. Mira felt the air shift, thicker, heavier, pressing down on her chest until every breath felt stolen. The entity above didn't chase with sound, its presence alone descended like a crushing weight, urging them further into the suffocating dark. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a basement that shouldn't have existed. The ceiling towered impossibly high, lost in shadows that twisted like ink in water. Massive chains hung from above, swaying as though touched by an unseen breeze. The floor glistened with a reflective sheen, and when Aaron looked closer, he realized it wasn't water, it was a mirror-like surface rippling with faint, distorted faces staring back with hollow eyes. Liam stepped forward, mesmerized, until one of the reflections blinked. Not his reflection, another. A face submerged beneath the surface mimicked his movements a second too late, grinning with a mouth that stretched unnaturally wide. Liam stumbled back, but the face followed, breaking free from the reflection with a hand that rose up through the floor like it was emerging from a shallow pool. The first scream came from Mira as more hands surfaced, pale, skeletal fingers clawing upward, dragging malformed silhouettes of people who looked half melted, half remembered. Their bodies dripped like wax yet moved with a speed that defied their broken shapes. The chains overhead rattled violently, shaking the entire chamber as if reacting to the awakening below. Aaron grabbed Myra's arm and pulled her behind a pillar, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He could feel the entity's presence thickening again, descending into the basement like a monstrous tide. It wasn't just following them anymore, it was feeding off the fear, growing stronger, shaping the room into something alive. The reflections stretched across the floor, linking into a single, shifting sheet like a living organism waiting to consume anything that fell into it. One of the wax-like figures lunged at Liam, dragging him toward the reflective surface. His fingers clawed at the air, slipping against the smooth floor as the distorted faces pulled him closer, their hollow mouths opening in silent screams. Mira rushed out from hiding, grabbing his arm with both hands, fighting against the force pulling him down. But before she could pull him free, the entire chamber shook. The chains snapped upward, as though something above had seized them all at once. The figures froze. The reflections stilled. Even the air paused. Then the tar-like darkness from the staircase poured into the room, tall as a tower, immense and formless, no longer hiding in fragments or shadows. It had gathered itself fully at last, and as it loomed over them, Mira understood with paralyzing clarity, this was not the heart of the house. This was merely the threshold. The real horror lay beyond the darkness, and the entity intended to drag them across it, one by one.